everyone. Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Nick Blumberg. Brandis Friedman is on assignment. Here's what we're looking at.
It's been a long journey.
A jury finds Chicago police officers used excessive force when searching a local family's home.
Only thing is, one thing, simple. It's really simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon.
Tensions rise between Iran and the U.S. as President Trump builds up military presence in the region. And what this photo tells us about microplastics and the food chain. First off tonight, a federal jury is ordering the city of Chicago to pay $5.7 million to a family whose home was raided by Chicago police officers. The jury found that 9 officers acted improperly and used excessive force against Ebony Tate, her mother Cynthia Eason, and 4 children back in August 2018. A CPD SWAT team set off flashbang grenades before breaking down the door and repeatedly pointing assault rifles directly at the children during the raid. The jury also found the city liable for the officers' misconduct, saying that officials knew officers were routinely violating Chicagoans' rights while serving search warrants and improperly using force against children. Here's Tate following today's verdict.
I'm just glad we have justice now, and I just pray that this will put a stop to the wrongful raids for the next family. Shouldn't have to go through what we went through.
The warrant obtained by police to search the apartment identified a man who did not and had never lived in the home, but lived nearby, according to the lawsuit. The city's law department did not immediately respond to a request for comment. No more hidden costs in Illinois utility bills. That was the cry from consumer watchdogs today as state lawmakers filed a measure aimed at blocking utilities from passing along certain costs to consumers in their bills. Among the items, membership dues for trade associations, insurance protections for shareholders, advertising aimed at boosting the company's image, and fees for lawyers pushing higher rates at the Illinois Commerce Commission.
Many Illinois consumers have no idea that their electric, gas, and water bills cover tens of millions of dollars in self-serving utility expenses that have zero consumer benefit. Rather, they advance the agendas of Illinois utilities and increase their political power. A Cub analysis of documents filed in utility rate hike cases from 2023 to 2025 found that, on average, for the average year, ratepayers could save $40 million a year across Illinois.
With Indiana poised to approve a new stadium authority, a high-profile Bears fan is looking to pressure the team into staying in the land of Lincoln. Former Governor Pat Quinn is announcing an online petition drive called Bear Down for Illinois, where fans can call on the team's owners to stay in state.
I think it's super important that all of us band together in the best traditions of George Halas, the owner, founder, coach, and player of the Bears. George Halas believed in Illinois. He went to the University of Illinois many years ago. He started the team more than a century ago. And George Halas understands, I think, the value of loyalty.
The Indiana House of Representatives voted 95-4 yesterday to approve creation of a state authority aimed at building a new football stadium. That bill now goes back to the state Senate for final approval before it can head to the governor. Up next, tensions rise between Iran and the United States. Local specialists weigh in right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Iranian officials are arriving in Geneva ahead of tomorrow's critical talks with the U.S. over Tehran's nuclear program. During the State of the Union address last night, President Trump said Iran is working on missiles, quote, that will soon reach the United States. Iranian officials say Trump's claims are false and believe the president is setting up a justification for military action. Negotiations are taking place during a period of civil unrest in Iran, with thousands of protesters killed by the Iranian government. Joining us to talk about all that and more are Jacqueline Saper, author and Iranian-American commentator and a native of Tehran, Ibrahim Abu Sharif, journalism and Middle Eastern Studies professor at Northwestern and author of Social Media, Religious Authority, and the Arab Gulf Crisis. Robert Pape, political science professor at the University of Chicago. He is the founding director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats. And via Zoom, Richard Porter, an attorney and longtime member of the Republican National Committee. He was a White House advisor to President George H.W. Bush and Vice President Dan Quayle. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your time. Jacqueline Saper, as we just mentioned, headlines for weeks about massive anti-government protests in Iran and harsh government response. What exactly do we know about the situation on the ground right now?
About the protests in Iran? Well, there have been many protests in Iran. Basically, they're seeking for dignity and a normal life, not ideology. Just a few days ago, February 21st and 22nd, students from 3 universities clashed with anti-protest police. So far, this regime has always had protests from the beginning of its inception. The very first protest was in March 8, 1979, when I was a high school senior in Tehran, and I watched thousands of women go to the streets to protest the mandatory hijab. And even then, they were assaulted, verbally assaulted, and some were attacked by knives and broken glass. Come to current situation, in 2009, there were protests against the rigged presidential election, and people chanted, "Where is my vote?" Then, of course, I was here on this program in January of 2020, and I mentioned that a few months before, in November of 2019, there were protests on fuel charges, 1,500 were killed. Then we know the protests of 2022, Mahsa Amini and hijab, and we come to today. But the protests today are different for a few reasons. First, they are massive all over the country, and they are now chanting death to the dictator. So they want the regime to fall. Second is the use of technology. Today there's facial recognition, phone tracking, drones. So the fear and the danger is not only in the streets, it's when you go home, because they can come and arrest you there. So it's quite different nowadays. Yeah. And of course, the amount of people being killed, even President Trump mentioned that 32,000 killed. It could be more.
Yeah, I mean, how about that, Ibrahim Abu Sharif? The president saying 32,000, human rights activist news agency says 7,000, the government just 3,000, certainly a significant number in any case. But, Iran is saying President Trump's, comments around these protests is misinformation. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. That 32,000 is excessive, even by independent authorities who are trying to look at the numbers. But again, when we look at the numbers like this, we're looking at case building. And so the higher the number, the more need there is for the United States to be involved in Iran. So I think we need to look at the messaging of statistics and messaging about why we should go into Iran. Iran's a very peculiar place. For the last 20 years, Iran has been a week away from having a nuclear weapon. And so that threat itself seems to be weaponized as a reason to get into the regime, to get into the country and for its resources. I mean, let's not play games. Iran has a lot of oil, and it is also a powerful military country, regionally speaking. And so, I mean, the protests and the repression, to make a case against the United States going into Iran does not mean you're supporting the regime there at all. We're talking about two different things, those different conversations altogether. But I think the United States is ready and poised to do the same mistake they did with Iraq, pouring trillions of dollars into a genocide in Iraq, as many people have called it, that ultimately failed.
How about that, Robert Pape? There were, of course, those targeted strikes in July on the Fordo nuclear facility, but, you've written on your Substack that the U.S. is falling into a trap that will lead to military escalation. Do you see any way to break that cycle?
Well, it's important for the listeners to know that I've studied every air campaign since World War I. I published a major book, Bombing to Win. It's still required reading by the U.S. Air Force. I've taught for the U.S. Air Force. So I'm not just an academic who's been behind the scenes. I've advised every White House since 9/11, not this one yet. But just to directly answer your question, we're falling into what I call the smart bomb trap again. We fell into that trap in 2003 with shock and awe. Well, many of your listeners and viewers will remember that. And then that led to terrorism, a civil war, and 20 years of a forever war. Why did we go in? To build democracy. There was lots of pro-democracy movements. I am very pro-democracy. The way to build democracy is not at the barrel of a gun. It's not by dropping bombs, because what happens when you drop those bombs is they do destroy the targets. That's the trap in the smart bomb trap. You can be 100% tactically successful and strategically fail. And that's what happened last June. We'll all remember when President Trump said, we obliterated the nuclear program in Iran. No, we put craters in dirt and concrete. That's what we did with the smart bombs. And just last night, you heard he's worried Iran's going to get a bomb again. He's admitting failure. That is the normal cycle of the smart bomb trap. Stage 1 of the smart bomb trap was last June. We are now about to go into stage 2. Hopefully we won't, but if we do, this will be a much more difficult stage to get out of. We're about to cross a threshold of the smart bomb trap, which is not then going to be up to us anymore, whether we can just walk away.
If I may add something, this is a very dangerous regime. It's not like Maduro's Venezuela, that he was a cartel, criminal cartel. This is a regime-based, ideological regime based on the concept of velayat faqih, or Islamic jurisprudence, with a supreme leader. And since the inception of the revolution, they have welcomed war, isolation, and sanctions. For example, in 1980, the Iran-Iraq war happened, September of 1980. The war could have finished in 1982 with the liberation of the city of Khorramshahr. But then Supreme Leader Khomeini purposely wanted to extend the war, which he did for another 6 years.
And she is right in a broader sense, because the history of air power in trying to topple regimes shows it radicalizes the regime. We all think, oh, sure, let's kill who's there, they're bad, and they'll be replaced by somebody better. Almost always, it's the opposite. If you just think of Dudayev, we helped kill the Chechen leader Dudayev in 1996, April 1996, thinking he was a bad guy. And what did we get in his place? Baziev, who's the guy who did the suicide attacks that went on for years inside of Chechnya. Hamas leaders, we've killed Hamas leader after Hamas leader after Hamas leader, or helped the Israelis do it. Indeed. And what do we end up with? More radicalized bad people taking over. This is the danger of the smart bomb trap.
And I want to get Richard Porter in this conversation as well. You know, the president spent just a few minutes on Iran during last night's State of the Union. We haven't necessarily heard quite as many of the detailed plans leading up to a potential war, perhaps the way we did in Iraq or Afghanistan. What do you make of the potential for a strike against Iran?
Well, I think the risk here and the president's possible strategies can be different than both Afghanistan and Iraq. It's probably more akin to what he did against Soleimani, what Clinton did in Serbia, and what maybe a hybrid in terms of what Trump himself did in Venezuela with Maduro. I think that there is no taste in the Republican administration for boots on the ground in any extended or massive way in Iran. I think in the wake of Iraq and Afghanistan, the president has promised no more faraway, forever wars, and I think that would severely damage his standing politically if he were to launch a war that looks and smells like the Iraq War. So, Robert, I don't think that's a risk.
Well, the real
I think
danger,
the risk that you've been pointing out is, gee, will it be effective? And we do see that. I think Robert's right. I mean, it's often the case you need to have more than just bombs coming from the sky to change the regime, to change behavior and that sort of thing. One of the things, the strategy that the Trump administration used in Venezuela was to identify leaders down a level that they thought that would be more responsive to United States concerns. And certainly in the Venezuela case, concerns were around drugs and political prisoners and so forth. And if and to the extent that there is some, I hate to use the word moderate, because we know there aren't many. That was a mistake that Reagan made with dealing with Iran. But if there is some other level down, a level or two, that if they kill Khamenei and some of the other leaders of the IRGC, in other words, they might get to someone who they can work with, who will then assure the West, assure the world that Iran will focus on Iran and not be seeking to build a bomb. I don't think that there's going to be an invasion of Iran.
I'm not predicting an invasion. That's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is and you can hear, Trump is looking for an off-ramp. And the off-ramp is, oh, we're just going to do a little strike, walk away. The problem is we are encouraging Iran to accelerate its movement to a nuclear weapon. And so if we do this kind of small strike, that's only going to accelerate this even more, and we'll become even more fearful a few months from now. So what we are facing is the smart bomb trap, where every time we get mesmerized by this idea of tactical success, we're digging our hole deeper and we are encouraging the bad people to do things worse. And what's worse? The nuclear weapon.
Well, and there's also, another round of peace talks scheduled in Geneva tomorrow. Richard Porter, back to you for a moment. We've heard kind of back and forth from Iranian leaders, some of them calling out president's lies, but also saying that they'll do what it takes to get a nuclear deal. Do you think negotiations could still be fruitful here?
Well, I think that that's the hope. Ronald Reagan said of the Soviet Union, trust but verify. I think with Iran, you have to distrust and verify. I don't think there's any chance Iran will be telling the truth. It's not who they are. If they wanted peace, they could have peace. If their pursuit of the nuclear bomb is disconnected from and independent of whatever the United States does. There's been a kind of a monomaniacal focus in Iran. It's a revolutionary regime. They want to spread the revolution. They want world domination. That's what they are. That's what they want. So we have to get them to change their stripes. I think it's very unlikely that that's going to be the case. And for that to occur, I think there has to be personnel change. I think some people have to die, and you have to have new people that are going to be, the leaders of Iran. I think that's the only way you see a change in Iran. Now, I do think that this is buying time for the U.S. to assemble its forces, to build the defensive missile sites and so forth around our more vulnerable facilities, to move people out of the region, and to get ourselves prepared for what's going to be a much rougher engagement than Venezuela was. I think that was I agree with that comment. I saw that
Certainly,
China has moved some anti-ship missiles there. So, look, I think it's unlikely that talks will succeed. I think Trump would be thrilled if they did. He's established real credibility by his willingness to use force and use it effectively, both in Iran and Venezuela. So we'll see. I think it's unlikely to be successful, though.
Ibrahim?
Yeah, well, just a couple of comments. The use of totalizing Iran as being dishonest, they have a problem with truth, and also world domination. These are words of a propagandist, and I think that we need to avoid that. Iran had a deal with the Obama administration. They're willing to do it, and they would give up their nuclear ambitions if the sanctions are lifted and they are no longer a world pariah. And so their economy can be more robust. And so I think one of the things that, as a teacher of professor of post-colonial studies, some of the things that we're looking at, the United States posture towards the Middle East and South America has colonial appetite involved with it. I mean, we're looking at America bombing, harming the global South. They're not doing this to Norway, Sweden, or whatever. So let's live with our eyes open a little bit. Let's look at the patterns that we're seeing here. This is a colonial appetite resurfacing to take over, whatever that, to make secure a region from what? I mean, from who? For Israelis? Is that what's going to drive your policy? Is that the whole policy?
If I may say,
why has Saudi Arabia been worried about Iran? It isn't just the idea this is colonial. That's nonsense. This is a regime that's threatening its neighbors. It's been financing terror around the region. They've been fomenting trouble for the Saudis.
Excuse me, as a person who lived in the Arab Gulf for 18 years, what you're saying right now is factually untrue. The Saudis have come closer to Iran. The Qataris have come closer to Iran. The Emiratis have come closer to Iran. So what you're looking at is an absolutist point of view that is no longer in effect. Maybe that worked in the Reagan times, but not now.
The real problem is not Iran, it's whether we would take yes for an answer. So President Trump didn't take yes for an answer with the old deal. He's the one who ripped it up in 2018. And go back to Saddam Hussein in 2003. Saddam did everything possible to turn over every site possible that we asked, including everything the CIA said, over 400 sites inspected by the UN, and you know what? We couldn't take yes for an answer. Well, how are we going to take yes for an answer here unless we actually control the country? Are we just going to trust that somehow there's no bomb-making material? I think this is the problem with the smart bomb trap. We've gone down a road, and this is exactly the fear that's driving us forward, not the reality.
We've just got about 20 seconds left. I'm sorry.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said he mistrusts these negotiations, and Steve Witkoff, envoy to the Middle East, has said, why don't Iranians capitulate because of all this Navy presence there? But we're all talking about nuclear issues. This regime has about 2,000 ballistic missiles, and the people don't want this regime. It's beyond that. And they may block Strait of Hormuz. Yep. That's a problem. And currently the Supreme Leader has delegated Ali Larijani as if he's targeted, that
there is a successor
in place, not as a supreme leader, but this regime will fight to the last breath to survive.
Unfortunately, that's where we'll have to leave it. Much more we can say on this topic, and we thank you all for sharing your expertise. Jacqueline Saper, Ibrahim Abu Sharif, Robert Pape, and Richard Porter. And up next, local birders accidentally make a scientific discovery. Brandis Friedman and Patty Wetley explain in a conversation recorded earlier.
Birding enthusiasts in Chicago have been treated to some unusual sightings over the winter as migratory ducks chill out along our waterways. But in the process of photographing these visitors, some people have managed to document something else altogether. They captured an image of an invasive species that happened to be a key piece of evidence for researchers at Loyola University, Chicago to use. Here to break down all the twists and turns of this story is WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley. Okay, Patty.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on here. And we got to start with the odd ducks.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got a photo. It was released showing a duck eating a crayfish.
Yes.
What is so special about that photo?
So many things special about it. First, it was a white-winged scoter, which they breed up in northern Canada. They usually spend the winters along the coast. So to have them here is interesting. To have one in the Chicago River instead of on open water of the lake was what drew so many people to River Park, which is not that far from the studio here on the north side. They could get closer views of it. And one fellow, Mike McCauley, who shared pictures with me, caught one diving, came back up. As he snapped the photo, crayfish in its mouth. And people were like, that's a big crayfish. It is. It's a red swamp crayfish, which is invasive and really only found in that stretch of the Chicago River. And there are researchers, Ruben Keller has a lab at Loyola University studying those crayfish in the river there, and they had always suspected that birds were maybe eating them, had no way of proving it. This photo 100% proves without a doubt that crayfish are being eaten by the birds. And that's important because what the research also showed was that these crayfish are full of microplastics. And so proving that the birds are eating them, that's showing one way that microplastics might be moving up the food chain. Okay. So yin, yang, good, bad.
You see it happening.
A lot to digest.
So this picture then, this evidence, very helpful for the researchers at Loyola.
Yeah, because otherwise, these crayfish are in the murky Chicago River. You have no way, how are you ever going to capture a diving bird underwater eating one of these? They said it's so helpful. Birders know where to go to get these photos. They're out there with their amazing equipment that can zoom in on these things. So it's a great example of, community science, or just how an everyday person's observations can actually help with scientific discovery. It's really exciting.
So what's been the focus of the research for the Loyola researchers?
I mean, they're looking at this invasive population that is really very limited to that stretch of the Chicago River right now. These can outcompete so many other things, but it's that they are such a source of food for fish and for birds, but also they themselves, like they said, they're not selective in what they eat. So they just hoover up whatever is on the ground. And they said they were finding fiber balls of microplastics stuck inside these crayfish that they can't expel. And it's like, we have no idea, how is this affecting the crayfish? And now that a bird is eating it whole, consuming it, assuming that fiber ball is going with it, it brought up so many more questions.
So many more questions.
So many more questions, so much more research, but they do know now, 100% sure birds are eating these crayfish.
We've got our top people on that.
They're on it.
A lot more research for them to do.
Yes.
Patty Wetley, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website. That's at WTTW.com/news.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget, you can stream Chicago Tonight on our WTTW YouTube channel every evening and catch up on any programs you may have missed. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, righting the heaviest wrongs for more than 40 years.